In 2021, I was navigating some pretty hard life things, having lost both of my parents the prior year, having our oldest son join and depart for the Navy, a lot of departures. And here our youngest son was beginning his senior year, and this new life of empty nest was emerging on top of everything else that was happening in the world, right? One of the things that helped was diving deep into the work that I love. But I discovered that wasn't enough, and I needed to make some other adjustments. A series of things happened that got my attention. Something started happening with my eyes and vision that just didn't feel right. There was a change in my overall mood and well-being, and there was a nudge from God that came in the most unexpected way. And that's where Paige comes in. Come to find out, she had a similar story. Today, I want you to meet Paige Huyette. Paige is a real estate broker in Montana. She's obsessed with raising the bar in the field of real estate to really help established agents create clarity around their zone of genius so that they can build their business with ease. We share our story of meeting and her journey of digging beneath the surface to make the changes that she truly needed to make in her business and her life. Today, we share the intersection of our stories and so much more. I'm Carla Reeves, and this is Differently, a podcast where we explore the ins and outs of what becomes possible when we're willing to think, do, and show up differently to the moments of our everyday lives. Hi, Paige. Welcome to Differently.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm so excited that you're here and that you were willingly said yes to come. And why don't you start by telling people, just give a sense of who you are and what stage of life you're in and what the work that you're doing.
Sure. I am a creative person that has turned to the world of real estate. So I'm a real estate broker, and I work with driven people that really want to change their lives, and the focus is on where they live. So that's what I'm doing right now.
I love that. So I want to tell the story of how you and I met because I told you before we hit record that honestly, it's something I'll never forget. So when I get ready in the morning, I typically have either a podcast, a sermon, or music playing. And for whatever reason, it was, I don't know how many times this happened, Paige, but it was over a half dozen times that I would be like listening to music, and all of a sudden a podcast would come on. And it was a podcast that you were on. I didn't know Paige Huyette, but this podcast with Paige Huyette just kept coming on my player. And I don't even think, like, I might have started that podcast once. It was through Ashley Gartland's Better Than Big podcast, which I love. And I'd listened to many of her sessions. I can't even remember if I had started it one day and then stopped it. But for whatever reason, this podcast, your voice and your name just kept appearing on my screen in the morning while I'm getting ready. And the title of the podcast was, do you remember what it was? It's something about burnout, but I don't remember exactly.
Something about getting small to grow bigger, or it's based on her theme of her podcast, but it was centered around burnout.
But your particular episode was something about burnout. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But anyways, so I finally, I feel like this is how God works in my life, that, things will just show up and again. And it's like, okay, I'm going to listen. Like, there's some reason that I need to hear this podcast and I'm willing to listen. And so I did. I listened to the podcast, and it was really interesting. But in my mind, it was still like, well, I'm not burnout. I don't know what the message is. And I think I listened to it twice over the course of, I don't know, a few weeks. And then I started thinking, I started noticing that my vision had been kind of funny. Like, my vision, I'd been having things in my vision, and I wasn't feeling like as amazing as I usually feel. And after listening to your podcast, I just started noticing, and I started noticing that I'd kind of gotten in this habit of like after dinner with my family, Shane would go in his room and do his thing, and Quentin would go in and do his thing watching TV or something. And I would just sort of gravitate to my office, and I love my work. And so I'd gotten in this habit of like working all day and then going back and working out, a few hours at night. And I think I had done it for a stretch. And I started just thinking like, you know what? Maybe I think there's something that you were describing and experiencing that we'll have you share in a minute, but that I was like, I think there's something going on. I think I need to make some shifts in, what I'm doing. And so I did. And at the same time, I felt like what you were talking about was I was also in the process of going through some business training and feeling like and was being invited to like do these interviews for my business and differentiation and figuring out my customer a little bit deeper. And I felt this inspired nudge to reach out to you. And I thought, that's crazy. Like my mind wanted to say, that's crazy. You don't even know her. She's a complete stranger. But I had a feeling you might be in this entrepreneurial network that I was in, because that's how I was connected to Ashley Gartland, the podcast. And so I did. I found you and I reached out. I'm like, I know this is crazy, but would you be willing to just meet on Zoom? And I thought I was meeting her to interview her about my business, because I felt like she represented like what my customers deal with, my clients deal with. And so she was willing to talk to a complete stranger and make time in her schedule, which I was so grateful. And we got on Zoom, and I was nervous. Like I got on with a complete stranger on Zoom. I think I started telling you like about what I was doing for my business. And then you started just sharing your journey. And I don't even remember, Paige, what you said, but like you said like one line, and like the next moment I was just in tears. Like the wells had just opened up, and whatever you said in that moment, like helped me just release all this pressure I was placing on myself to, like I'm a recovering workaholic, and I had slipped back into this pattern of like doing more and working harder and achieving. And like, I was exhausted. And you shared something, which I'll let you share in a minute, but that just helped me release all that. And here I was on Zoom crying with a complete stranger. And you were so gracious and so loving. And I wanted to share this story because I think that, sometimes people are just placed in our life at a time that we need them. And here a complete stranger came into my life. I was willing to kind of take that inspired nudge. She was willing to say yes. And like, I will never forget that moment. That was had a huge impact in my life. And so I just want to thank you for being here. And I'm so excited for you to share.
Oh, wow. It's nice to hear that story again. I remember that moment. Would you like me to share what I said,
Yeah.
if I can
Yeah.
paraphrase it? I don't remember the
Please.
exact conversation, but if I recall correctly, we were talking, and I said something like, when you're an entrepreneur, you're always pushing forward. You're always going, 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 looking for the next client. And that's how we're wired when we work for ourselves, is that we're only as good as what we're doing now to get the next whatever it is. And I shared an experience I had had when we were faced with a pretty daunting task with a family member that was going to require pretty significant financial outlay in a short period of time and a lot of emotional bandwidth, which is sort of what led to my burnout. But at that moment, I can recall telling myself, which is what I shared with you, that instead of that pushing, my visceral reaction was, okay, it's go time. Let's push. Let's do this. You've got to just grind and get through this. Instead, I actually sort of turned around and almost looked over my shoulder at myself and said, you've got this. You've built something. You've built this business. It's not just you grinding and pushing and selling. You have something that you have built that you can actually rely on. And to me, that was such a huge shift in my thinking, because I have been self-employed my entire adult life with a few short stints of working in corporations and small businesses. But, since my early 20s, and I'm in my late 50s now, I've always worked for myself, and I've just assumed that that's what you do, you push. But I had never taken that perspective that you've got something, you've really built something that's substantial and tangible here that will get you through this. And if I recall, that's what we
Mm.
talked about, because you were just feeling sort of, I don't know, what was the word? How would you describe you were feeling then at that moment?
I think it was that, that push energy, just like as an entrepreneur, you just are, you're driven to just, like I coach people around it. It's that achievement cycle that you're
Mhm.
just on. And there are times, even doing something you love, you can get tired and burn out. And that's the thing. Like, I love what I do, but I was doing it too much, and I had to restore like healthy boundaries around that because it was exhausting me. Like, good things can exhaust us, right? And I
Yeah.
remember you also saying, like, you were kind of at a point, I can't remember if it was because you weren't feeling great and you were thinking like you needed to make some big change, and then you realized, wait a minute, I've built something here. I don't Maybe this isn't the time to change or create something new again, which was a pattern, right, that you'd done in the
Yes.
past. Is that right?
Yes. Very much
Yeah, and you
so.
were like, what if my business could support me? And I think as a coach and as a giver and someone who uh, has a heart to serve, I'm so used to outputting that way, that the thought of like, wow, what if I've done that? And what if I could let my business support me? Like, what does that look like? And what if I didn't always have to be pushing? And so that was just such a beautiful message. And I think a message that people listening will probably really resonate with.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept when you work for yourself, isn't it? You're not used to spending time telling yourself that what you're doing is great, because you're always on to the next thing. And I am a chronic doer. I'm a recovering chronic doer, I should say, these days,
Yes.
where it could be everything from drastically shifting careers. I mean, we're talking drastic, to the little things. Oh, I need more clients. I'm going to build a new website for relocation clients, or I'm going to create this social media blitz. Whatever it is, I'm constantly directing my attention to something new, and that's exhausting. What I realized over time is it never allowed me to dig below the surface with some of the things I was doing. And
Mm.
that's really what I've been spending time on lately, is getting in there with, whether it's a work project or personal growth, and seeing what's underneath and whether or not it's worth spending my energy on.
Mm.
And when you do that, you find things that you just don't see on the surface. So that's been the benefit of that.
Yeah, so I remember you saying that there was a point where, like, you knew that making changes to systems or strategy, which is something you had done in the past, that this particular time, that wasn't what was needed. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I built my real estate business from the beginning on systems and automation, because as soon as I started in this profession, I looked around and I saw everyone running around with their hair on fire. Even agents who have been selling for 20 years, just running around like crazy people and defining that as busy or successful. And I thought, wait a minute, all of these things happen every single time we have a transaction in real estate, and it takes up all your energy if you're pushing and trying to take care of those tasks that are the same every single time. So that was what I built my success on, was systems and automation and follow up, which is oftentimes the hardest thing in real estate for agents, because they're so busy looking forward, just like we talked about, running, looking forward. And so automatically I thought, well, that's what I do well, and that's how I built this thing. So I need to keep doing that. But for whatever reason, I think it's having been in this business for long enough, and it's just like any other business. We're all self-employed. I looked around again and thought, no, the answer isn't to buy more leads, hire a social media expert, do all of these things that are always just being dangled in front of us as shiny objects. I just thought I can't do it because I had sort of burnt out and lost my why. So for whatever reason, I decided to find a coach outside of real estate. And real estate is a very sort of insular business where it just like anything, we all have our own acronyms and talk and we sort of live in this bubble. And I thought, I don't want a coach who's going to push me to sell more, buy more, talk to more people. I can't do that anymore. So I found a coach outside of real estate who considers herself a leadership coach. And she's a former therapist, which was interesting because she brings with her that insight into understanding what's behind the message that you're saying out loud. So
Yeah.
she really pushed me to dig deeper, like we just talked about. I'd say something and she'd say, hold it, stop, wait, what was that? What did you just say? And she wouldn't tell me what I was saying. She would just ask me to repeat it. And next thing you know, we were digging below that surface and finding these things that I didn't even know were messages I was telling myself. So that was a really interesting way to break out of that work burnout for me.
Yeah. And did some of those explorations help you to see where you were driving yourself and help you
Oh,
break some of those
absolutely.
patterns?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I have this sort of overriding need for people to be treated respectfully and fairly. And that can be a tough nut to crack in real estate. So I tend to be a fairly assertive person by nature when I'm working. But at the same time, I also give respect and expect it in return. And quite often that doesn't happen either with clients or other colleagues I'm working with. So I would get derailed really easily. If, for example, I'm working with an agent and they're disrespectful or rude or whatever the case may be, it would throw me off.
Mm,
It would throw me off my focus, which is essentially taking care of my clients and doing a good job. And so she helped me to find these patterns of just small, I don't want to call them personality quirks, but things that were messages I was telling myself that were keeping me from being better, being a better person,
mm,
being a better service professional. And these were all internal messages that, for whatever reason, I had been riding along with for years until we unearthed those. And I was able to
mm,
see that how they were affecting me on a daily basis. And then she helped me identify those. And I would spend a week or 2 weeks until we talked again, noticing when that would happen. And
mm.
then I was able to recover faster and get myself back on those tracks. So that was not something I expected to get out of that coaching at all.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the journey of kind of feeling this burnout and then hiring a coach. Like, what were sort of the milestones of that journey? And yeah, I'd just love to hear that.
Um, well, I think it was about the beginning of 2020 before everything shut down. She and I started working together the beginning of that year. And I didn't really know what to expect. I guess I tend to go into situations very open and just waiting to see where they take me. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, I guess I allowed myself to be vulnerable with her. And because of her background and training, she was respectful of boundaries, but she also could easily recognize where to push me. So for, I'd say, probably a good 6 months, we really worked on all those tiny little things underneath the surface. We didn't talk about, well, we did. We talked about how I wanted to grow my business. And she is a leadership business coach, but it turned out that that wasn't what we were focusing on. I went in thinking I needed to overcome obstacles on how I had made mistakes in hiring people and what was holding me back from that and other sort of work related things that I thought I had to deal with. And instead, we dealt with all of these small things underneath the surface, which in turn helped me with the bigger things. So it was sort of a flip or an opposite of what I expected.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because it is like I think about it like there's like the surface solution that or tend to think we need to do to solve something, and then there's like the root solution. And when you can address the root, which it sounds like you have done, then you can really make sustainable change, right? When you just address the surface, you might fix it for a little while, but then it's going to come back. And so it's really important work you did.
It was, and the other unintended consequence is that it allowed me to physically understand my limits as well, which
Mm,
unbeknownst to me, I hadn't been paying attention to. And I think that goes back to what you and I talked about at the beginning with where we're driving and we're pushing and we think that we just have to pull back from that, but we have to figure out, what our limits are. So by recognizing triggers that would frustrate me or anger me with colleagues or clients who are maybe disrespectful of boundaries, I also started to recognize how I would feel. Like, my head would start to feel really hot, for example, when I felt like someone was being condescending, or I started to track my energy levels, and they had changed since the last time I did that. I think the last time
mm,
I actually started thinking about when I work most creatively and when I have the most energy was probably before I had kids. And my kids
mm.
are in their early 20s now. So it had been that long. And I realized that my high and lows had changed in terms of when I could work and when I needed a break. And doing that behind the scenes work allowed me to also figure out when my energy levels were really low. So when should I stop for the day? When should I schedule a meeting? When should I do a workout? And really honoring those, even if they felt silly. So sometimes if I'd have a meeting that I knew would be a fairly intense meeting, I would deliberately not schedule something after that. And normally in the past, I'd go back to my office and I'd start cranking and working again.
Just grind all
So
day.
yeah, it's like, okay, well, you've still got 4 hours left. There's plenty to get done. So instead, I'd be like, okay, that was intense. I need to reflect and I need to think about it so I can be better for them and give them feedback. And so I might call it a day, and it might be 1:30, 2 o'clock. And I might say, you need to be done for the day. That was enough. And that's still tough. It's still tough,
Yeah.
but
But
it makes more
I
sense.
it excites me so much because I remember it was like years ago, the first time I heard this idea of manage your energy instead of your time. And I thought,
Hmm.
what? Like, I think we hear about it more now, but back then it was
Yeah.
like this revolutionary idea that I was like, what is that? I want to know more about that. Um,
Yeah. It
and
goes against everything that we've been wired to do. And in our
yes.
culture, we're all about work days and weekends, and none of that really makes sense if you really pay attention to what you need as an individual.
Yeah, we're all so different, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, I think our bodies, like, there's like a thermostat that we can be monitoring regularly to
Mhm.
see that. Like, I've gotten better at that too, just noticing, like, I know that usually, like, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the day, like, I tend to be busy, like, in my email or like randomly doing things, but not effective at all. And I've started to be aware of when I'm just making motion, but not anything that's really getting accomplished, like just spinning,
Mhm.
kind of just spinning
Yes.
and just stepping away and walking outside or just doing anything to interrupt and sort of replenish my own energy. And I love what you're saying about just taking time after a meeting or before a meeting. Or I was actually talking to a client this morning about your morning routine. And instead of being like, you have to do this, this, and this every day, or you have to do this workout, like for creative people, at least for me and for this woman I was talking to, it works better to be like, okay, my commitment is that I want to create movement every day. I want my body to move in some way. But today I can like follow my energy and my creativity to what that's going to actually look like. And for me, that just
Right.
works so much better.
It does. There's a trap that I have to watch out for too, because I am so contrary by nature. Someone says left and I go right. That's just how I am. I also tend to sometimes take things a little too far, so, and I'm a rebel by nature. So if someone is saying, you can't take that much time after, I'll go
You double
overboard.
it.
So sometimes I have to watch out for myself and say, sometimes, Paige, you've got to get back in there and get uncomfortable. You can't always be comfortable. You can't always just do things your way and tell everybody it doesn't matter. So there's a balance there for sure.
For sure. Yes, I would completely agree. I would completely agree. So tell us, so after this, like what shifts did you make in your life that you're still sort of incorporating and practicing that have made a difference for you? I mean, this is obviously one of them, but
Yeah, well, having that space, I've definitely niched down in my business. In real estate, it's always take as much as you can get and grind, grind, grind. Don't ever say no. I've never been a fan of that, but couldn't figure out how to actually implement it in my
mm,
day-to-day business. So I made some fairly drastic changes over the last year in the type of clients that I've chosen to pursue or work with. And that's been very hard. If you're in sales or work for yourself, to have people knocking at your door or your virtual door, in my case, my website, and not figuring out a nice way to tell them you're not interested
mhm.
because everyone is worthy of service. And I always want to provide something of value. So I've really tried to figure out a way to be very choosy, but also provide value to those that don't align with what I'm trying to do. And that continues to be a challenge because
Mm.
that plays into money stories, my relationships with money, my relationship with my own time. So, but I have really committed myself to honoring where I am best, the type of people I am at my best with, and really trying to make sure that that's where I spend most of my time.
Well, and that sounds very honoring of other people too, that, if you're willing to say, you know what, I'm probably not the best agent for you and can point them in a direction maybe that leads them to somebody who's a great fit for them. Like I get that it's contrary to what we've been taught or how you've done business, but it sounds very honoring of other people too. Have you
It
had
is,
any?
and at the
Yeah.
same time, yeah, well, and at the same time, it's also recognizing when someone comes into your world and they're not honoring you. So it's
Mm,
not just I'm not the one that vets all the time and says yes or no. It's a matter of really listening and paying attention and coming into it at the early stages of a relationship with respect, but also noticing if they may not be respectful or
mm,
ready. In the case of real estate, they may not understand what my role is, and that can be due to what they've, read on the internet or have been told by friends or have had bad experiences. So that can be tough because in the past I've always taken the path of, well, I can teach them what a great real estate agent looks like and acts like.
mm.
It's my job to raise this profession all on my own shoulders.
Lot of
Um,
responsibility,
and
right?
teach everyone what a great agent looks like. And I just thought that's just not possible. Number
Mm,
one, and number two, some
yeah,
people just aren't ready to receive that. They're not in a place in their lives or whatever the case may be to accept that. And I have to be willing to know that and let it go. That can be
yeah.
tough.
Any other shifts that have been, really instrumental for you?
Yeah, I had a real biggie a couple months ago. I am building a single day coaching program. So it's a transformation day for established agents who essentially have burnt out and lost their why.
Mm,
But similar to what we talked about, they want to stay in either they have to stay in real estate for financial reasons or they want to. And most people that are in it for, I'd say, over 5 years do love it and do want to stay in it. But it's a tough business with high burnout. So I'm in developing this program. I am actually working with a coach that specializes in building these single day transformation programs. And I've learned a couple things through this. Number one, the work beneath the surface is very hard and takes time. I have been trying to build this program on my own for probably 2 years and realized I needed support. So I had to get vulnerable and say, I can't do this on my own. I need help. But one of the coaches in this program was reviewing a phase of work I was doing, and without her realizing it, she said some things that were really hurtful to me. And I don't mean in a personal way. I mean that I am not great at receiving criticism.
Mm.
I'm used to being creative, being successful, and she questioned some of the things that I had submitted as being maybe superficial or unclear. And my initial reaction was to dismiss it, was to say, well, she doesn't work in my field. She doesn't know what she's doing. And I'm getting pretty vulnerable here. But this was just my reaction was, she doesn't know what I'm trying to do. She hasn't even read through this thoroughly. Then in my head, I could feel myself saying, she's not experienced enough. And I thought, what am I doing? So I stepped back actually for a couple of weeks from the project, and I realized that I was trying to protect myself.
Mm.
And until I was willing to take the advice of this coach, regardless of her experience level in what I do, I couldn't get to the meat of the matter. I couldn't get through to the next phase. And for whatever reason, I really sat on that and thought about it quite a bit, and was able to kind of break through this sort of protection, the shield I had of protecting myself from being vulnerable. And it hurt. It was hard. I mean, it almost physically hurt. I felt like I was really breaking through something that I built up over years. And once I was able to do that and accept, well, what is she really trying to say? What is she? Forget her experience, forget all that. What is she getting at here? She's trying to help me.
Wow,
Accept the
what a
help.
shift. What a
Yeah.
shift.
Accept this help for whatever it's worth. There's going to be value in it if you're willing to accept it. So once I did that, it's almost like everything just opened up in what I was trying to create for this program that had just been superficial for so long. And
Wow.
it was tough. It was tough, but I'm grateful for it. And that shifted how I approach all of the other pieces of feedback I've been getting on that program now too. It was pretty big for me.
Wow. There's so many things I want to say, but I think sometimes, well, one, being an entrepreneur is some of the greatest personal development work you'll ever do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And two, like I can only imagine how that just increased the depth and impact that your program is going to have. Three, like how you modeled and had to go through probably what these agents are going to have to go through when they do this program, right? Like that
Right.
they're going to be required to do some of that too. And now you could lead a story with that, that opens up their mind and prepares them for that journey, because that's how they're going to get the most out of what you're putting together, right?
Yeah. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, it's really cool. Well, and
Yeah, and of
I
course
just,
and
yeah.
it bled over to other parts of the work that I do. Now once I was able to recognize um, that need to be open and learn, even if we didn't see eye to eye, I've tried to take that and apply it to the daily work I do too. If I'm butting heads with someone, at least in my head, I am, not physically. What is it? Usually it's something we share something similar that we're butting heads about. So what is it that we have in common that I'm struggling with, instead of
Mm,
being dismissive or brushing it off? Or it's like I try to look for that commonality or that link now. So and it's hard.
mm.
It's hard work, but
Yeah, but the ripple impact of that, like that'll just continue to compound. Wow. So if you if you could speak to the heart of someone that was maybe in the place that you were, or the place that I was, kind of feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, and not sure what to do next, like in hindsight, like what would you want to tell them?
if I had to share one thing, it would probably be to change where you're receiving your support. That's what had the
Mm.
biggest impact on me.
Like
And
getting
that's part
outside
of
the
allowing
bubble,
yourself
like you said.
yeah, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, whether it was that different type of a coach that I chose or, yeah, just I think when we are caught in ruts or we're burnt out, we've sort of created this shell around us to protect ourselves from being hurt further or getting further burnt out. We need to preserve whatever energy emotionally and physically we have. So the only way out of that is to really get truly honest with yourself and vulnerable. And it can be tiny little steps. It could be joining, a forum online where people are supportive and there aren't people complaining and bemoaning what they're doing. So it could just be a shift in a tone of where you're spending your time online. It could be really small. Like you said, that podcast kept coming up. You just never know where you're going to find it.
Where the
But
help
making a
is
little
gonna come
shift,
from.
yeah. So making that little shift then leads you to a person or a program or a coach or readings or whatever it is to keep it. It's like a ball. Once you start pushing it downhill, you can't stop it. So
Yeah.
really, just sort of getting out of your bubble and changing where you're looking for your support.
Mm, that's beautiful. So, tell us a little bit about. It sounds like what you're excited about next. I think you may have already said it, but what's inspiring you now, and where can people find out about what you're doing and all of that good stuff?
Yeah, so I am very excited about the program. It's called Amplified Agent, and it's a single day program to help established agents develop clarity around why they're doing what they're doing, and really niche down, which can be scary, to define their superpowers, essentially, like what they're really good at, what differentiates them, and then I help them implement that through systems. So I'm very excited about that. Um, and people can find me all over the place. I'm on Insta at Paige Huyette, LinkedIn. MontanaGoodLife.com is my website where I sell real estate and talk about things like that. And I like Insta a lot because I get to been experimenting with reels and dancing a little bit, much to the embarrassment of my kids.
Oh, awesome.
Trying to have fun with that.
That's awesome. And lastly, what does differently mean to you?
Geez, so many things right now. I think it's what I just touched on is how can you look at something that might be scary or intimidating and take something from it that can help make you a better person.
Mm. Beautiful note to end on. So I am so grateful that you came and shared. I know your story and your experiences are going to touch people, and I have so much gratitude for you, that stranger that kept popping up on my podcast, and you just had an impact on my life, and it happened in such a unique, sort of unusual way that it will be with me forever. I just know it. So I'm so happy our paths have crossed, and we might have to do this again.
Great. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Differently. I hope it stirred your thinking, and I invite you to take one inspired action from something that stood out to you. If you want to hear more conversations like this, hit follow on your favorite podcast app. And if this episode could impact someone you know, please pass it along. Remember, new episodes drop weekly. See you next week.